All right. So good morning, everybody. I thought Erica's presentation was a really nice, great overview of the executive functioning skills. So our goal today is just to kind of go into a little bit more in depth kind of about teens and executive functioning and hopefully some strategies for you. So my name is Nicole Plevniak. I'm the school psychologist at the high school on the child study team. And I also I had the great pleasure of working with two interns that we have here at the high school. Samantha Glenn, she's a school psychology intern from Columbia, and also Marissa Ross, she's a school counseling intern from Seton Hall. So they were very instrumental in helping me with this presentation. So what we're going to talk about today, we're basically going to just go over a little bit more in depth about teen executive functioning. That tends to look a little bit different, and there's some different ways to approach it than you would maybe with a younger child, which is kind of why it's easier for us to do these breakout rooms to talk about the differences. We're going to go over just some general principles to kind of improve overall executive functioning, just a bunch of tips for you. And then we really hope to go through some specific examples with motivation, prioritizing, organization, breaking down assignments, having sustained attention, self-monitoring their own behavior. And then there's also just some everyday activities and some suggestions we wanted to provide you that improve overall executive functioning. But we really hope you walk away with a better understanding of your own teen's current demands and kind of how to assist them or how to get started on assisting them. After we go through the presentation, we'll have an opportunity about 15 minutes to go through some question and answers. So if you want to write down some specific things that you want to talk about, we'd be happy to do that at the end. All right. So teen executive functioning. As Erica mentioned Dr. Lee mentioned in her presentation, executive functioning demands are definitely very high, especially due to the pandemic. But a lot of students' executive functionings really are still at the same level, or they're actually much lower because of the motivation and because everything else that's going on in our lives due to the pandemic. So executive functioning is definitely a hot topic right now. Executive functioning skills really involve cognition and behavior. They involve thinking and doing. And some skills come before others. So first you need inhibition before you really have some of the higher level of metacognition. But they really involve everything in your life. Like Dr. Lee said, it really, permeates down into your relationships and how your teen interacts with you. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen that. You're like, why is my teen acting like this? I think a lot of things can come into play with executive functioning. As Dr. Lee also mentioned, we really have to remember that you're not fully developed until about age 25. So even though those teens seem like they're really independent or want you to believe they're really independent, they still might really need a lot of help in this area. Some things that we've seen at the high school this year, especially in light of the pandemic, is kids are having much more difficulty with organization in a different way. Before it used to be disorganization with a backpack or a locker, but now it's kind of organizing and prioritizing everything that isn't a piece of paper that a lot of kids struggle with. They have an inability to kind of start tasks or break them down. They have a really hard time getting going. A lot of them are lacking motivation and kind of monitoring themselves to get going or stay on a schedule or stay on a routine, paying attention in their classes, either digitally or virtually or in person. They also are having difficulty kind of seeing those long-term goals and seeing the point of them and working towards them. Sometimes it's as little as long-term projects or studying for tests, but also some of those bigger ones like applying to college or, getting their driver's license. A lot of them are seeing kind of, what's the point? It seems so far away and so many steps to get there. And then of course, we're also seeing a lot of social emotional well-being being impacted. So if you're kind of struggling in some of these executive functioning areas, it can really make you feel pretty crappy. And in the reverse, if you are feeling really anxious or depressed, that also might impact your ability to access some of those executive functioning skills.
So executive functioning skills are important for almost all life tasks in all stages of life. So from planning and cooking a meal to making a large purchase of a home, executive functioning plays a really large role, as we have discussed before. So this chart highlights the main executive functioning skills involved in various everyday life tasks that your teen may encounter. As you can see, many executive functioning skills are involved in just one task. So this chart just shows the main skills involved in each one. So for example, even though emotional control may not be one of the main factors in school performance, in this chart, it can make an impact on a teen if they're having large emotional difficulties. So now I'd like to move into a more specific example related to teens. So does this picture look familiar? Driving is often something that many teens are very excited for. Parents, on the other hand, often feel some level of worry, and for valid reasons. It's one of the first milestones of independence that involves many executive functioning skills. So as you can see, executive functioning skills are involved in activities such as driver's education, the act of driving itself, and even taking care of the car. So driving isn't automatic for teens because it's so new and their executive functioning skills aren't fully developed. Teens have distractions like their friends, phones, loud music going in the car, coupled with it being a new task. So I just want to share a few scenarios just to show you the impact of executive functioning on driving. So for example, John is looking at his text messages while driving. This would show a lack of response inhibition. Jane keeps buying unnecessary clothing items instead of saving up for her car. This shows a lack of goal-directed persistence or response inhibition. And lastly, Jake had a large reaction when his parents said he could not take the car anymore. This would show a lack of flexibility or emotional control. So driving is just one example of many of how executive functioning deficits impact everyday life. So our presentation is geared to help assist these very normal struggles that teens are having, so your child can be successful in school and in everyday life.
So we wanted to start out before we get into kind of some more specifics. There's these 10 principles that we found that were just kind of really good overall tips, kind of either starting your journey with helping out your teen or kind of maintaining helping your teen with executive functioning skills. And we'd like to mention we have resources at the end of the presentation, but we used a lot of these resources from this book called Smart But Scattered Teens. It's a great book that's helpful, specific to teen executive functioning. So number one, don't assume that a struggling teen has executive functioning skills and is just not using them. I think we think a lot about high schoolers, like finally they're independent, they're not a little kid anymore, you don't have to supervise them so much, and they're in high school, of course they should have these skills. Or, you know, maybe they're just being lazy and they're just kind of they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. We really need to evaluate their strengths and weaknesses. And in this book, actually, there's a really nice questionnaire that kind of will help you evaluate what your teen's weaknesses are and what they're not, which is important to kind of gearing how you're going to help them. A lot of times they'll talk about, have you seen signs in the past? So like, have teachers commented to you before about, you know, your student is having difficulty paying attention in class, or do you have to remind them a lot? Do you have to nag them a lot to do things, to complete tasks? Do you visit the lost and found a lot? You know, are you replacing things all the time? And also homework demands as they kind of increase in middle school and high school. Did you start to see like a decline in grades when before they seemed to be okay? Number two, you'll need to help your teen learn these skills. They really don't acquire through observation or osmosis. So just like any other skills, you need explicit teaching in them. Even in school, a lot of executive functioning is kind of incidental, or it's not really explicit. There's a loose structure to a lot of things, or teachers might make suggestions or an occasional prompt in school. But there's so much information these days, especially in this digital world. And so much is coming at them that it requires much more demands to process. So they really need explicit teaching. Number three, understand your teen's innate drive for mastery and control, and focus on opportunities for the teen to pursue objectives related to independence. So I know you've all probably heard, like, when they were a toddler, I just want to do it myself. I want to do everything on my own, but teens in the same way are the same now. They want to do it by themselves and they don't want your help. Unfortunately, though, they still need our help. really the difference between a child and a teen is they have this really big sense of need for control and independence as they move towards adulthood. But we can of course see that maybe they don't have the best decision-making skills, and they can't have all that independence. So we need to build in some of those little opportunities for independence with our assistance. So kind of taking little opportunities that you can give them a little bit, but not too much, just so that you can still teach them. Number 4, while the long-term goal is to reduce support and promote independence, we must also keep your teen in the game. So sometimes we have to help motivate them to see how some meaningless task, or they may seem meaningless or irrelevant, that they are important. They don't have the ability to kind of have that future orientation like we do. Like we can kind of see, we can look back at our past experiences and say, it really would be helpful if you just followed a schedule or followed a task. They often can't do that. They can't picture the future. They don't have that past experience. So we often need to help provide that for them. And restricting them too much will often lead to more conflict. So we might have to take a little risks with them in order for them to see that. And that's kind of like that phrase that's like, let them feel they're unsuccessful or that they fail a little bit, so they can see that they can visualize what that outcome might be if they don't utilize some of these skills. Number 5, move from the external to the internal. So since kids were young, you've always been their frontal lobe. Executive functioning skills are all right here in the frontal lobe. So that's just like, you would hold your kid's hand before they cross the street, and you would remind them and tell them all the risks that were involved when they were crossing the street. That was all external. So, but now as they're a teen and they're getting into an adulthood, we want to move everything to internal. We want them to say like, oh, isn't this important to you? For you to be able to want to be successful and independent, we want you to move to care about that. This is something that they also need help with. And some of those things we'll get more into details later on in the presentation, but you can change the environment, or like having an alarm clock for getting up in the morning. You might want to shift some things so that you're not the only one prompting and providing that executive functioning or frontal lobe for them. Or you might want to change the task, like kind of how you break it down so that they're able to do some things on their own. And also the way you communicate with them is important. So moving on to the next few ones. Number 6, work with your teen on strategies to assist them without being annoying or alienating them. So this is hard, of course, with the teen. They often think that parents are always annoying, right? So you really want to play into their strengths. It's kind of all about that relationship with them. If we all know that we get them to do more things with, working in a positive way. We want to focus on communication and negotiation and choice. So if your teen feels like they have a say in the decision-making, they'll be more willing to work with you. If they don't, it might lead to more conflict, and they'll feel like you just want to control them. So it's important to discuss your expectations and your rules and provide them choices as much as you can. Recognize them doing something positive, especially in the area of executive functioning, and compliment them often, just so you're kind of, cueing them into those executive functioning skills of letting them know you're really good at this. We want to keep working at that, but I noticed something else that it looks like you're struggling with a little bit. How about we work on that together? And what are some ways we can do that and really have like a conversation together instead of kind of telling them what you want them to do. Number 7, consider your teen's developmental level and capacity to exert effort. So everybody's different, right? No two friends are the same, no two siblings are the same, and your child may also have different executive functions than you or your spouse. It's really important to remember that and not to expect too much from them. And knowing kind of what's typical for their age, like in that first slide about kind of what executive functioning skills are important for school right now and what is important to expect from them. Some of the higher level executive functioning skills are much harder, and they're going to come later on in life. So we don't want to expect them to be able to do all of them now in high school, especially without some explicit teaching. Let's see, number 8, provide just enough support for your teen to be successful. So Of course, if you have too much support, they may appear successful, but then they don't fail to develop that independence. It's really a careful balance. And of course, if you have too little, they fail, and then they also fail to develop that independence. So think about just giving them just enough support. I like this analogy, to cross the finish line with you from the back, cheering them on and not crossing for them or dragging them across the finish line. You really want to support them through that, but they really need to do it on their own. Number 9, keep support in place until the teen achieves mastery or success. So don't pull back too quickly. Of course, if you see them being a little bit more successful, reward them, give them positive praise. And they also might push you away and them seeing that they can do it themselves. But it's important, to just keep that careful balance and see how they do on their own for a little bit, just so the support is always there. Number 10, when you stop the supports, fade gradually, not abruptly. So just slow and steady. I kind of like the visualization of just like learning to ride a bike. You don't just push them off on the bike and say good luck. You hold on for a little bit, you stand close by, you catch them when they need to. It's the same thing when you're teaching them a new skill, just kind of tread lightly. So now moving on to motivation. This is a big deal with a lot of teenagers. And I think it's become more apparent with the pandemic that they're struggling with being motivated to do much of anything. Having an adolescent is really a tricky balance all the time. You have an increasingly yielding in your role as a decision maker, as your teen starts to take over as like the sole decision maker. They're not a kid anymore. You can't make decisions for them and help them with every step of the way. So you really have to walk that fine balance. But we know that teens don't always make good decisions. Those decisions might have serious consequences, and they really minimize their vulnerability, especially to us. They'll say, I'm fine, I can do this, I'm fine. Parents and teens really want the same thing though. They want an independent, self-sufficient adult who makes good decisions. But it's all in the details how we get there. So with motivation, communicating your teen to increase motivation can be really difficult, but we thought these 4 guidelines were pretty helpful. So be prepared to really compromise. It's all about these conversations that you're having with them. Negotiation really helps teens feel like they have autonomy and gives them control, better to develop their skills. Number 2, share your intentions are to help your teen. I think it's all about making sure they understand where you're coming from, that you're not really trying to control them, that you really want the same goal. Teens become more open when they're explicitly told that their parents' goal is also for success. Number 3, emphasize independence and not parental control. You want to emphasize independence for your teens' decision-making will be really great for them. This can increase their motivation when they feel that huge sense of self-worth. And number 4, be clear in your rationale of why something is important. It's easier to work on something that's more important to them, like a sport. Like the more you stick to your rationale, the more likely compromise will be achievable. So for example, I like when there was an example in the book about a kid told their parent that they really just hate every time they walk in the door, the first question is, okay, what's your homework? What's your homework? What do you have? Let's get started. And it was kind of like nag, 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 and letting them know that this is something that you don't like either. This is an interaction that you don't like, and sitting down together and really coming up with a way that you can change that interaction and say, how about you do this piece about, writing your assignments down, and I'll change my interaction with you when you come home about just kind of saying, how was your day? And we'll get started maybe in 30 minutes about going through your assignments. It's all about that conversation, about really hearing them out and listening to them about things that are important to them. You'll get much greater buy-in from them. So there was a couple certain types of teens that we saw, and how, or in the book, they identified 6 different ones about and how to best get them motivated. So I'm hoping you can kind of see some of your teens in some of these. So the different kinds. A take charge teen is someone who really likes direction. So if with academic problems, they might say, yeah, I know I have a problem that's affecting me in my schoolwork, and I'm open to working on it and getting help from someone of my choosing if that's needed. So they're really kind of seeing that they have difficulty, and they're okay with taking charge. The best way to get them to motivate is really let them lead and set the direction. Don't try to take control or criticize maybe some of their ideas. Really allow that to kind of that momentum of them wanting to take charge to get going. A bargainer is someone who is motivated through extrinsic forces for doing something. So for schoolwork, your teen may say something like, I admit that I'm having a problem and it's affecting my schoolwork, but can we work out some kind of deal that if I work on it, I get something as a reward? For that type of student, to get them motivated, hear them out, listen to that, use incentives, use phones, use video games, like, anything that they really want. The book even mentioned something about cash, even though they say that they don't love giving cash for grades, but the goal is to build those habits for them to be doing well, that ultimately benefits them. And then you can always phase them back. And we're going to get more into kind of some reward incentive charts that you can use later on in the presentation. An autonomy seeker is someone who would negotiate standards and timelines with. So for this type of student in an academic scenario, they might say something like, I guess I'm having a problem that's affecting my schoolwork, I think, but I'd like to try and handle it by myself. I'm good. So unfortunately, we can't accept that they are going to solve it on their own. We will need to use some performance standard, like if you said something to them, like if you complete all your homework on time or get a minimum grade and that criteria is met, then we're good. So kind of holding a standard for them, I think, is important. I think a lot of parents function like this. Like, if you get B's, then I'll back off. I won't, I don't have to nag you. But if it can't be met, this is the conversation that is really important to have ahead of time. If that can't be met, here's what the steps are that we're going to take. And that negotiation would involve you then assisting them more. This really gives them the forewarning about what will happen if they can't meet that criteria. It tends to hopefully lead to less conflict. It's all about those conversations ahead of time. A help seeker is someone that needs to give decreased amounts of help and encourage problem solving to build their autonomy. So this student may say something like, I know I have a problem that's affecting my school, but I can totally, but I can't manage it at all. I just want you to take care of it for me. You just do all of it, Mom. I think it'd be better if you just, talk to my teachers, you just do everything. And as parents, it's easy for us to be happy to jump in. But this doesn't really help them problem solve. We need to be less directive and elicit possible solutions and encourage them to try it on their own. So kind of like building those little baby steps of like, have you tried this, or would you like to try that? If we just take over for them, we're really kind of taking over still as their executive functioning and not allowing them to flourish and develop those skills. And then lastly, we have the avoider. The avoider really needs to be motivated extrinsically and by something that is super high interest or significant. So this teen may sound like, I don't think I have a problem at all that's affecting my schoolwork, but if I do, you shouldn't worry about it. I'll take care of it. So this is like a double whammy. They're in denial about their problem and they don't want help. So this one is pretty hard. You really have to up the ante to something big, especially to get them to kind of start working with you. A first then is really important to use. So saying first do this, then you could first finish your homework, then you could go outside and play or go play video games. Working that way is best, but it's important to state the positive. So instead of saying, if you don't do your homework, you won't get to do this, keep it positive, saying, if you do this, you will get to do this. The avoiding and help seeker types are usually the harder ones to work with, but feeding into their style is essential to try and figure out how to boost their motivation. So hopefully that's helpful to kind of get started. In the chat, I just wanted to ask you guys to look at these pictures about someone approaching a task and the incentive and tell me which one you would rather do, A or B. Which one looks more motivating? I don't even know if I can see
second one. B.
B. Thank you. Absolutely. So a lot of times this is basically about what your teen or all of us, how we approach tasks sometimes. I like to think about this one when I clean the kitchen. I don't know if everybody's doing that a lot more cooking and kitchen cleaning. Cleaning the kitchen after cooking is a huge task. And sometimes I'm like, what's my incentive for cleaning the kitchen? I guess it would be, the next time I clean next time I cook that the kitchen is clean. But sometimes breaking a task down allows you to be able to see that incentive a little bit better. So if the kitchen is just a complete disaster and there's so many steps involved, if I break it down and say, okay, I'm just going to start with emptying the dishwasher, I can see the incentive a little bit better. That task hill is not so big. And also changing the incentive can be helpful too, so that the incentive ends up being bigger than the task. So if it's not an incentive enough for me to just have a clean kitchen, I might say, after I'm done cleaning the kitchen and I complete that task, I get to go do something for myself. I get to go have a break, go have a cup of coffee by myself. So keeping that in mind with your teen is really important too. When a task doesn't seem important, it's a lot easier to procrastinate it and to just not approach it, which plays into their motivation. Most of the time we have the skills and the desire is there, but the motivation is not. So just like kind of cleaning the kitchen, like I have the desire to clean it, but the motivation might not be there all the time. And I also might not have the skills. So really breaking things down is really helpful. Children and teens really rely on extrinsic motivation, something that's material. And the goal over time is to get them to develop that internal motivation, but you might need to stick with the external incentive for a little while. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we'll talk more about that later, about some more ideas, specific ideas you could do. So in general, how do I help increase my teens' motivation? Incentive systems will be shown in a little bit, but those are really helpful. And that's really just kind of, you do this, then you get this, you do this, you get this. And after you keep doing that, it becomes a habit. Really altering the demands of a task are helpful, especially when it comes to something like chores in the house. So instead of saying something like, clean your room, you just got to go clean your room, breaking that down will be much better. How about start with just getting me dirty laundry in a laundry basket? Like really, like when we ask them to do too much, that's often kind of when their motivation shuts down too. So if you get a lack of motivation, try breaking the pieces down. Changing the physical or social environment. Physical modifications like alarm clocks or whiteboards or organizing systems like we spoke about, and utilizing communication strategies. Focusing on positive language, setting rules and expectations like curfews. All of these things kind of help. Some do's and don'ts: state the issue, take turns talking, listen, pay attention, talk in a normal tone. These are all helpful when you're communicating to have these conversations with your teen. Accept responsibility, use empathetic language, and keep it brief. I really like this one about showing real world application to kind of school executive functioning. There's little things that we can do all the time about kind of working in their mastery for executive functioning that we can apply later on to school, like grocery shopping or baking or banking, or having them take ownership at a doctor's appointments. Like breaking down those pieces, like just kind of like creating a list to go to the grocery store, having a list with them, crossing it off, like practicing those kind of organizing executive functioning skills in real life is really helpful. And they might see the meaning of it later on in school.
Okay, so we're going to be moving into talking a little bit about organization and prioritization. So once we have the motivation piece, we can then start to move into prioritizing or helping your team to prioritize creating an organizational system and following it through. So the first one here, kind of expanding a little bit off of what Nicole had said, is using their interests to your advantage. So this is really your time to get to know your teen. If you don't directly know kind of what they're really into, then directly asking them or observing them. What are they doing with their friends? What are they talking about with their friends that excites them? So for example, if you get, halfway through your essay, you can borrow the car this weekend, you can go shopping, whatever that may be. Another thing is choices.
So as talked about earlier, teens want to feel independent, but again, they also need your guidance and assistance. So maybe giving them a choice, do you want to work on your history paper or your science project first? Or even giving them a choice with regard to what will motivate them to get through that assignment. The next thing you want to do is clearly state your limitations or your personal priorities. So for example, if your student is working towards or says that they want to work towards maybe having an expensive car later on or a car that's not safe enough, you want to make sure you're direct with them, like, no, we can't do that, but let's see what's another object that you want to work for. Same thing with when your child is applying to colleges, be realistic about what colleges you would let them apply to. The next thing, you can have your teen research the steps to complete a task and research what they would want to prioritize first. So I'm going to be talking more about that in a little bit. But again, it's important to give that sense of autonomy to your child. And then number 4, when they are in the process of completing a task, you want to use prompts to get them to initiate and stay on task and keep those priorities in mind. But what I'll expand on in a little bit is making sure those prompts aren't intrusive, where the teen now finds it aversive to complete the assignment or tasks. Okay, so moving into organization. So we are going to discuss ways to assist your child in organizing through breaking down the types of organization that there are into preliminary, physical, and electronic. So the first category may not be very familiar to some people, but preliminary organization is basically the kind of organization that the child carries out within the classroom or home setting that can kind of serve as a baseline for how they can organize themselves in the future. So some ways to get an idea of what your student's preliminary organization is thinking about, if how do they take notes within the classroom setting? Is it on a bunch of papers scattered around their desk, different notebooks? Is it streamlined into Google Docs? Is it in binders? You want to get an idea of kind of what style they're comfortable with, even if it's not the most organized. What are they doing with homework, tests, and quizzes? Are they keeping them? Are they just throwing them away after they get them back? What does their workspace look like? This is particularly important for even the motivation aspect as well. And then what materials are they comfortable using? So binders, notebooks, are they strictly on the computer? And that will kind of help move into deciding whether to assist them in organizing physically, which includes the following that's on the slides: binders, folders, notebooks, or encouraging more electronic. So apps, Google Sheets, Docs, stickies, reminders, and notes. Okay. So for a moment, I just want you to take a look at this picture. So may look familiar, I see some smiles, may look familiar to some parents. It's obviously no secret that being disorganized can lead to stress, being forgetful, and a lot of increased anxiety for both you and the child. We're actually going to use the chat for this piece. So same thing that you guys did with the A and B portion. I just want you to share your observations in a quick sentence or two. So first question, how do you feel looking at this child in his workspace? Even a one-word answer is totally fine. Yes, definitely stressed.
Mhm.
Yep.
Overwhelmed.
Yeah, lots of overwhelmed, absolutely.
Mhm.
Anxious, concerned, yep.
But I think a lot of our teens would say, what are you talking about? It's fine. It's fine. It's not stressful to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. An organized mess, I've heard from some teams too. Yeah. Awesome. Next thing, quick in the chat, just a quick sentence or two. What do you think you could do to maybe help your child start small to work towards organization here? And then we'll expand on that later on. Yeah, great place to start. Or make your bed. Yep. Having a place to put things, quick temp, put laundry in basket. Yep, exactly. Small tasks that are easily achievable, which we'll expand on, but looks like you guys are on the right track.
Definitely.
Okay. All right, so first we'll talk about physical organization in terms of a filing system. So this I would recommend would be the first place to start, because this is important as keeping track of assignments, tests, and quizzes for current completion, and later reference is a skill that often takes a lot of practice to acquire and perfect to a certain extent. So a simple suggestion that has worked pretty well from my experience with some students has been to grab a folder, a simple 2-pocket folder. You can have the student label on one side current assignments and the other side past assignments. Now I'm aware that with virtual, some of the assignments are online. I would encourage you to, for your student who is more physically driven for this, to print out any completed assignments and file them in that 2-pocket folder. Another suggestion is maybe to put one side for assignments and then the other side for tests and quizzes. But again, I might leave that up to your student to decide, giving them the choice of how they would want to organize that particular folder. The next suggestion is a binder. Now, binders are really great if they're used effectively, but I've seen binders, they're kind of start like in the beginning, the first day of school, they look organized and then they kind of filter off. But basically grabbing a binder with dividers that separates the current and past assignments. So one side current, one side past, and then making use of that plastic front side cover, putting a blank piece of paper in there and telling your student, this could be your to-do list. So what I like to do is sit down with students and maybe in the beginning of the week on that to-do list, go through Google Classroom and write down any important dates, times, assignments, and put that on their to-do list in front of their binder. This way, they have it with them in school, they open it up, they see exactly what they have to do, and all of their classes and assignments are right next to them in that binder as well. The other thing in the picture over here, you'll see sticky notes. Sometimes it's very satisfying to put your to-do list on various sticky notes actually, and then once you complete them, take it off the front page. Again, just more of like a tangible like satisfaction, just taking it off, throwing it away, and I completed that. Okay. The next tip I have for physical organization is kind of observing how your child takes notes. So oftentimes we see students come in and, their notes for every day of the week is just like one giant blob on the paper or all over the place. Note taking is a skill that takes a lot of patience and practice to develop. So there are a lot of methods and techniques out there, such as graphic organizers, worksheets. But I find that starting small is helpful. So one suggestion is to, go through and show your student, hey, why don't we try just writing the date, top right corner. We put the topic of the day in the center. They can write their notes, however, whatever's helpful for them underneath it. But simple suggestion, but that's been helpful, is just drawing 2 lines underneath, 2 red lines, to break down one day from the next. This way they can, the dates in the top right corner, if they have to go back and study for a quiz, they can easily, take a look and reference that, and not everything's kind of mushed together on that page. Okay. And then for physical organization, for supporting that, and this also can go for electronic as well, but we want to make sure our reminders are helpful, but not necessarily too intrusive. So what I recommend is using, what we recommend is using visual prompts in your student's workspace to help. So perhaps you might want to put a sticky note on their desk with maybe 3 simple tasks. And I just used the ones that we talked about previously, but check your folder or your binder for your current assignments, update your to-do list, and separate topics in notes. and just have it there. This way, you reminded them, but you're not being too overbearing on them. Another thing is get creative with how you're doing visual or text prompts. So, literally like sending them a text might be helpful, maybe sending them an email. But I would try to avoid as much as you can, coming into the room, you have to do this and this assignment, sit down right now, because that can be perceived as very annoying by teens, and that might decrease their motivation. Okay. So for our students who are definitely more electronically driven, there are a lot of great accessories on phones, not only iPhones, Androids, whatever, as long as there is a smartphone. So for some phones, there's the reminders app, the alarms, which I highly encourage that you help your student to use, Google Calendar, and Google Keep is another great app that I recommend looking at in the App Store as well. It's kind of like a reminders that's on like an iPhone, but it's a little bit more organized, and you can get notifications sent to an email as well. One app that I wanted to highlight in particular was the My Study Life app. This has been monumental for a lot of our students. So basically, what you can do is take all of the assignments from Google Classroom for the week. Again, I like to do this in the beginning of the week with kids. Transfer them over onto this app, and then you can have it send you text reminders and email reminders. One great thing about it too is that sometimes with to-do lists, you have to wait until you're totally done with something to take it off your list. But with this app, even if a student writes an introduction of a paper, they can slide a bar over to say like, oh, I completed 5% of it, or I completed 10% of it. And that gives them satisfaction too, that they're visually seeing, okay, I made some progress in this assignment. So if you are interested in a tutorial on this, there's some links at the end of the presentation that will help you go through it. Otherwise, you can also just Google My Study Life app. Okay. And the last thing I wanted to talk about today is breaking down assignments. So often students feel a lot less motivated to complete their work because they're simply discouraged by the amount of work they have, and a sense of overwhelm can take them. So assisting your student to break down assignments is key in increasing the likelihood that they will view school as manageable and not something that's really overwhelming and that they can't handle. So like we had said previously, make sure to really help your students start small. So I would say the first step to any assignment should be done within a reasonable length of time, about honestly like 5 to 10 minutes. So we want to compare it to a larger task, such as, again, asking your student to clean your room, such as the picture that we saw earlier. If their room is a complete disaster, it would obviously be unrealistic to expect that your student would clean everything up within 5 minutes. You guys had some great suggestions in the chat. He would have to start small, like picking up laundry, putting it in the basket, making the bed, or picking clothes up off the floor so that he can proceed to the next steps, like vacuuming. Another tip we have is the subsequent steps can be generated via collaboration with student peers or teachers. So this is not comparing where a student is to another student. It's simply encouraging them, hey, like what, maybe you can check in with your friend and see kind of where they're at. Or if your student doesn't know anybody in the class, check in with the teacher, because it's very dependent on the assignment, the teacher, teacher style, and the subject in general of how the next steps would be broken down. So really quickly, again, we'll take a minute to just do a quick interactive example. So suppose your student came to you and said, I have a 10-page paper due in English on a recent book that I read. The paper is simply a reflection of how I feel, some of my thoughts on the book, and my perceptions related to it. What do you think the first step would be, or what would you suggest the first step would be in starting this assignment, knowing what we talked about? Yes, make some bullet points. Randy, the writing tutor. Definitely helpful. Make an outline. Yes, love that. Create an outline to organize thoughts. Read the book. Read the book, yeah. Yeah, make sure you read it through, no cliff notes. Yeah, well, definitely. Those are some great points. The outline is awesome. Even starting smaller than that, I do like the bullet point method as well, or even just writing like the topic sentence, again, making it really easy for them to feel like they've achieved something. So thank you so much, guys.
So now we just want to talk about attention. So I would like all of you to think of this next example on the next slide and how your teen would react or how any teen would react. So your teen started working on their large project that is due tomorrow about 20 minutes ago, but her text messages, Snapchat, and Instagram notifications keep going off. You've also asked her to clean her room for the past week since the floors are being redone in your home tomorrow. Think about how your teen would feel, or just any teen. Most teens in this scenario would pick up their phone if we're being realistic. So I would like to note that in this example of this person, they have difficulties with sustained attention and prioritizing. So as described in the main presentation with Dr. Lee, sustained attention is the capacity to keep paying attention to a situation in spite of distractibility, fatigue, and boredom. So a lot of teens have, trouble with this. So we would like to go over some strategies in the next slides. So many things impact attention. This can be mental health, motivation, distractions, attentional diagnoses like ADHD, but we should note that attentional issues impact children with and without ADHD. So one behavior system that we could use, which was discussed before, which is the first then system. So in the previous example, this could be that your child is finishing their project before Snapchatting friends. So you could come up with this together and it helps give them a sense of choice, which is very motivating for teens. Autonomy is a huge drive for them. And another system that could work is a contingency system. This would be your child working towards something tangible by completing the task that's required. So conditions have to be spelled out clearly, and an example of this will be on the next slide. So it's also important to always focus on the positive, which is related to these contingency or token economy systems, which I know can be very hard at times. So planned ignoring for negative behavior works really well when it's done consistently. So kids often look for attention when doing negative behaviors. So when we only focus on the positive, it really reinforces the behaviors that we want to see. And also just continuing to have those open discussions with your teen on how long they can work before they really need a break. So in the previous example, you could have your teen work on their project for 20 minutes and then take a 5-minute Snapchat break and then take a 5-minute break to clean the room just to get some movement as well. And then you could have them do this cycle until the tasks are complete. And then breaks really help teens be able to work for longer amounts of time, and incorporating movement and mindfulness can really be embedded into these breaks. And we have some examples of those on the resource slides. And then just checking in with how they're doing. If you're in the physical home, going up to their room or messaging them. And some teens may find this very invasive, but if you're explaining that you understand how hard it is for them to stay on task, it could be seen, differently in their eyes. And then just encouraging them to sit in the least distracting place possible, encouraging removing the phone out of the room or using noise canceling headphones is very, very helpful. Having them engage in self-monitoring when it's appropriate. This is for teens who are more of like that take charge teen that was described previously. And this could be done with phone reminders or a watch, and we'll have an example on the next slide of what that could look like. And just reinforcing what we've talked about before, using their interests to your advantage is very helpful. So even with chores, you can have them plan a meal if they like cooking, or wash the car if they're interested in automobiles, and just help them build up their ability to stay on task with their interests. So these are examples of self-monitoring and token economy systems. Self-monitoring falls more on the shoulders of your child and fosters independence. So they can have reminders on their phones go off after a predetermined period of time, and they can check in with themselves. So checking in helps develop metacognition and self-awareness. And this is the highest level of executive functioning skills. It's one of the last skills that anybody develops. So are they on task? Are they understanding the material? Do they need help or do they need a break? They can incorporate mindfulness or movement or reward themselves in these moments as well. On the other hand, a token economy or reward system is something that falls more in the hands of a parent or a guardian. A reward and fixed amount of points or tokens are needed, and it has to be done consistently to be effective. So here you can see an example of a token economy. They can look really different based on developmental appropriateness and just the interest of your child. You really have to focus on the positives in these systems. But for any type of system, if they're earning a reward less than about 50% of the time, the incentive isn't strong enough or the demands are too high. We don't want a reward to be too easy and we don't want it to be too hard because then it's very aversive. So the more autonomous teen would be self-monitoring, where someone who needs a little more guidance, might need to use a token economy until they can get those skills of self-awareness. And we just wanted to go over some general, just other skills that could be helpful. Helping your teen break assignments up. We spoke about that before. Also asking them what went well and what didn't after they finished an assignment. This can help them build self-awareness and just see what their strengths and weaknesses are. Just encouraging the use of sticky notes or virtual notes for reminders and mnemonic devices when studying. That really helps working memory. Also encouraging the use of journals to reflect their emotions. This can help build emotional control and have them make less reactive decisions. We can have them develop a list of positive statements or self-talk. So in emotional or stressful times, it's hard to remember these positive thoughts. So having them have like a little coping card, a list of positive statements and examples on the right side of the slide, that could be really helpful. And these are some everyday activities that a lot of your kids are probably already doing that actually do help with executive functioning. So sports can help with like self-monitoring, making decisions, flexibility. Yoga and meditation can help with skills such as sustained attention, reducing stress, and making less reactive decisions. Music can help with executive functioning skills such as working memory, attention, flexibility, inhibition. Theater is also really great for executive functioning. This can help with planning and memory and managing time. Strategy and logic games like Lumosity, you could sign up for free and they're fun games that can help build attention and working memory. Another one that you might be surprised is that video games actually can help children with executive functioning skills, though there have to be healthy limits on the video games and monitoring. So they can really help with attention and monitoring reaction times and inhibition. So if you could take one thing away from this presentation, it would be that you're initially serving as the surrogate frontal lobe, which is where executive functioning occurs in the brain. So it's very normal that teens need some support like the picture above. So you want to bridge the gap and meet them where they're at and finding that balance of teaching skills and supporting. So over time, the goal is to take away the support gradually as executive functioning skills grow as they get older.
So that concludes our presentation. We wanted to open it up to all of you participants, all of the parents to kind of, I know you guys have been chatting a lot, but if you wanted to share anything and if anybody else wants to jump into or ask questions, you can. Let us know. Does anybody want to? And I'm going to stop the recording too for a second. I'm going to stop sharing.